A hijab is a head covering worn by some Muslim women. It is a headscarf wrapped around the head and neck, covering the hair, neck and ears, but leaving the face visible. Currently, there are only 3 countries in the world that enforce the wearing of a hijab as law. What assumptions and judgments do we make when we see a woman in a hijab? Perhaps you are a Muslim woman who does not wear a hijab? What do you think when you see a woman who wears one? This is Stories Seldom Told. I am Smitha Tharoor. I'd like to introduce Remona Aly. Remona is a journalist and broadcaster in the United Kingdom with a passion for faith, lifestyle, and identity. She writes for the Guardian newspaper, is a regular contributor to BBC Two, Pause for Thought, and has been a presenter on BBC Radio 4's Something Understood. Something Understood is a half-hour program which explores a theme across different faiths and traditions through music, prose, and poetry. I both read her in The Guardian and heard her on BBC Radio 2 and BBC Radio 4, I'm happy to announce. Remona is also a podcast host across various platforms. In addition, Remona is a director of communications for Exploring Islam Foundation. What the foundation does is specializes in PR campaigns and creative resources to better understand Islam. For example, one of her campaigns highlighted untold stories of solidarity between Muslims and Jews, with a focus on the Albanian Muslims who sheltered Jews from the Nazis in World War II. Sounds absolutely fascinating, that campaign. But if that's not enough, Remona was also the former deputy editor of ML, a vibrant and glossy British Muslim lifestyle magazine, which was the first of its kind in launching nationwide in the United Kingdom. When she's not busy, and I don't know quite when that is, Remona is watching Korean drama. But seriously, when does Remona have time to do anything at all? I have no idea, other than the work that she does. I mean, in terms of watching Korean drama or having fun. I also have to say that I've known Remona for a few years. And along the way, we've talked about so many aspects of our assumptions, our judgments, our unconscious biases. So when I chatted with Remona a few weeks ago and she agreed to join me today, I was absolutely thrilled. So welcome, Remona. I'm really looking forward to hearing your stories of unconscious bias.
Thank you so much, Smita. It's actually such a lovely honour to be invited onto your podcast, because I've seen that some wonderful guests have been on, and so I'm very, very happy to be part of that panel of luminaries, and with you as well. It's just so great.
But I'm so thrilled. I am so thrilled. Thank you, thank you. But we're talking obviously about unconscious bias, and I mean, you and I have spent enough hours discussing it ourselves, most recently when we went up to Bradford. But, when we talk about, just stories of unconscious, what does that mean to you? These words, unconscious bias.
Yeah, gosh, you're the first person who really made me think about this as well, as I know I attended some of your workshops and I was just blown away, really. So, when we think about this, it's often kind of negatively when you think about the word bias, but I mean, I've just learned that it's just a lot more nuanced than that, as nuanced as we are really as human beings, because we're all born with certain packages, and those are informed by our environment and our beliefs and our cultures and our experiences, and even our personalities, of course, and we build up like certain understandings with biases in them. So I think that it's a question of being kind of foundational in a way. We have a basis to work from, and the assumptions or the biases that we hold, they may help us to survive because we have to make quick judgment calls sometimes, but we also need to critique them, because sometimes we need to unlearn the biases that we're unaware of until we have that moment of clarity, or we have to think about it. So I think it's developing awareness about unconscious bias is basically an ongoing process, and it's like a radio transmitter. Like, we read certain signals, but we need to keep fine-tuning them. So
I love that, a radio transmitter that we keep fine-tuning, which we all do. If any of us here who are listening and still owns something called a radio, which certainly I do, and I suspect so do you, Remona.
Yeah.
And we do, don't we? Sometimes it's just not as clear as it should be. So we turn the dial and we try and make it clearer in our heads or in our ears. And I love that. And I love the fact that you when you're talking about nuances. I mean, and the fact that we are nuanced, we're multidimensional, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes.
And it's about accepting that we are multidimensional and nuanced. So thank you for that. But in connection with that, Ramona, I would love to hear a story.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that happened to me was a few years ago, several years ago, in fact. I was in London for a meeting, and I jumped onto the tube, the underground, and I grabbed a seat. And you mind your own business, like everybody does in London. But then just a couple of stops later, a really scruffy-looking man got on at the next stop, and the entire carriage was kind of filled with a pungent smell, and it was not a nice smell, and we basically were all kind of trying to hide the fact that we were sniffing the air. And he sat next to me, I think one seat away from me, of course. And then a couple of stops later, another man got on, and this guy was a skinhead, and he had tattoos on his knuckles, a death skull on his neck, and he basically had piercings all over his face. And he sat opposite me. So things weren't really like looking great for me at that moment, or even smelling great. So was I was kind of trying to, again, mind my own business. This skinhead was trying to catch my eye. He would not stop trying to catch my attention. And I looked everywhere else. I looked at the floor, I looked at those adverts that you see above the seats, I even looked at the emergency alarm. But because I was just really worried, because I had made all these assumptions about someone who looks like him and the way that they would approach somebody like who looked like me. And so I avoided his look. He just wanted to actually engage. And I looked at him, and he said an Islamic phrase. He actually grinned at me because he wanted to convey that he also had this same reaction to the smell. And he just went, "Oh, astaghfirullah." And I could not believe what he had just said to me. He had uttered an Islamic phrase that, only Muslims use. And they use it, it means literally like, God forgive me. But, sometimes you use it when things are going wrong or something bad is happening. So I was worried that I was going to get attacked or, get some words of abuse. And all he wanted to do was try to connect with me in that moment. But I had to get off at the next stop. But, looking back, I really wish we'd had a conversation, that we just got off on the platform and actually just, learned more about each other. Because I was really thinking about how I had made that judgment call in that instant. And then he completely turned it all on its head. I thought it was just a really incredible moment.
Oh, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it really is. Firstly, we need to tell the listeners, because they can only hear you and they can't see you,
Oh, yes.
that, I mean, we already know, obviously, that you're a director of communications for Exploring Islam Foundation. Your surname is Ali, and therefore we have to make an assumption that you are Muslim. But also, you wear a hijab. So when you are sitting on that tube, your hair is covered. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
so
So I'm a
this
visible
guy,
Muslim. Mm.
precisely my point. You are a visible Muslim. You're not just a South Asian woman sitting on the tube, which is what I would look like. And
Yes.
you're sitting there, but we can see that you practice your religion by covering your hair. And so I
Yes.
needed to point that out to our listeners, because I know you and I know what you look like, but of course our listeners don't. But what I love is the fact that, I don't know whether to, I mean, I love it. I laughed when you were sharing your story, but it's also so easily done, isn't it? Here you are sitting on the tube, and and I mean, yes, there was a smell that's there, but the fact that this guy walks in and he's white. Can I just get some more facts around this
Yes,
person?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was white. He had his head completely shaved with piercings, and we basically looked like complete opposites of each other. And
Couldn't
yet
be
he was
more. Exactly my point.
could
Yeah.
not be more different. I'm
Yeah.
there in my headscarf, fully covered, you know, thoughts in my head of, oh, Muslim women who wear hijab are 3 times more likely to be attacked.
No, exactly. Yes.
In
Yeah.
public areas. And so all of that was going through my head, and like the kind of people who have attacked in the past decades have looked like him. So I had to make this quick I made a generalization about him immediately. and that's why I didn't want to make eye contact, because I thought that would invite something perhaps that was risky to occur. So yeah, it was a real moment of what what just happened.
But you just said something though, Ramona, which if you can, I would appreciate your response, and
Mm,
that is that the fact that women wearing hijabs are more likely to be attacked than women not wearing hijabs. And
mm,
number one, and the second thing that you mentioned, and you kind of said it in passing, is, and I'm not sure if that's what you said. Have you been attacked personally?
mm.
Looks like
Um,
that.
so I have had yeah, moments of abuse. So I have been called things on the street.
Hmm.
Post 9/11, it was very, very difficult, and post 7/7, I've had, you can have microaggressions as well. I've had quite a few of them. I've been called terrorist. I've been called Taliban. I've been called things. Once there was someone who threw something at me on the street, but the mist. So these things. A lot of Muslim women will probably have some stories of having to face certain abuse. But luckily, I haven't had anything seriously happen to me, and also, the majority of my life, I have had good experiences, not negative ones. So that is something I do want to point out.
Hmm.
But those negative ones do still affect you, and they can hurt you very, very much. I was on a bus once, and this woman would not stop abusing me and kept saying, "Muslims, you're terrorists, I'm going to kill you." And it was horrible, horrible. And I couldn't, it was on a packed bus, one of those moments where no one says anything. So that was, yeah, so things like that have happened. Yeah, so I suppose I was kind of formed by all of those experiences in that moment in the carriage as well.
Mm. Oh, and without a shadow of a doubt, which is what I wanted to bring up, because we make assumptions that we're bad people if we jump to, the example, for example, when you got off that tube and you were on the platform, you were thinking, I wish I'd spoken to that
Mm,
man, the skinhead.
mm,
And I wish you had too, and you would have
mm.
probably learned so much about each other, which would have been fantastic to break all
Yeah,
these assumptions and judgments. But
no,
equally,
absolutely.
a lot of people might think, oh, see, this is what people think of us because we look a certain way. And so
Mm,
just as people might look at you and make assumptions about you because you are a South Asian woman covering your hair, um, equally you're doing the same thing about other people. But why is that? In this particular example, you have personally had some very, I'm using the word difficult for want of a better word, but maybe
mm,
traumatic, very challenging experiences that have
mm.
disturbed you, that have upset you. And I think what we tend to do when we've experienced these really awful experiences is that we want to protect ourselves, don't we? And
Exactly.
so we want
Yeah.
to try and avoid that. So I'm not going to look at that skinhead in the eye. Who knows if he's going to spit on me or what? Is what's
Yes.
going on through your head. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And a friend of mine, also a Muslim woman in hijab, she said that someone who looked like him actually rolled up a piece of newspaper and just put it to her throat and just told her that she was a traitor, because she was a white convert, in fact. So that was another thing that all these things do play through your head. So sometimes those biases can be a protective gear for us, because it's about that survival instinct that kicks in as soon as you see someone, because sometimes you do need to make a quick judgment call to be on the safe side. So I think that's what I kind of did in that moment, but it also all kind of unfolded for me as well at the same
Yes,
time.
exactly. Yeah. Because if he
When
had not opened his mouth and you'd got off that tube, you'd have continued thinking
exactly,
what you think. And now you're suddenly thinking, I don't know, will you the next time there is a skinhead sitting opposite you on the tube, which will happen again anytime soon, um, would you be more relaxed in yourself? I wonder.
yeah, I think because I had this encounter, I wouldn't have as much fear as I did in that moment when I saw that man. So
Yeah.
he, I kind of I was clouded by that fear, and also the previous experiences that I'd had and the trauma. And so I let even like his appearance, his skull tattoo, his piercings, whatever, overshadow everything. But then I thought, well, I also get judged for looking the way I do, for wearing a headscarf. So it was also a lesson. It was a real learning curve for me because I wanted to know more about him. I wanted to know, okay, was he Muslim? Because he used that phrase. Was he friends with Muslims? You know, how did he know about this? So I had so many questions in my head. And, you know, often in that moment, heat of the moment, you haven't got the pluck to ask them or the courage. And also I had to rush off. But I
Yeah.
just wish it's one of those things that you wish you could meet someone like that
You
again and just
really do.
have that
Yes.
conversation.
I hope you have that opportunity because I think that's just so important. But if you don't mind, Ramona, because of what you've just said, I mean, I want to hear more stories, but because you've talked about judgment and assumptions about how we look and perception of people, um,
Mm.
in your opinion, what do you think? You let me just for our listeners reiterate that Ramona lives in the United Kingdom, in Kent, not far from London, and
Mm.
is constantly in London, as far as I know. And, and so, Londoner or somebody who lives in Kent, you grew up in Kent, am I correct?
Yes, yes, yes. I grew up in a village in Kent, so it was a very white village. No, we were the only Asians in this village, as well as the only Muslims. So it was kind of this double outsider feeling. And in the local village school, you know, I was the only Asian kid, the only Asian Muslim child. Not many people wanted to be my friend because I was different. So yeah, I kind of grew up knowing that I was different from a very young age. And that kind of constant awareness of that is it is it's something you carry with you all the time, and it can be quite tiring, but also because of that you can also have a kind of a sense of empathy as well, of, you know, okay, how do other people, how do I perceive others as well? So, you know, you are thinking you know, an outsider's perspective can also be something that's really helpful to you, because you're not only, you know, on the inside, you've almost got two perspectives all the time. So in that way, I think I tried to turn it to my advantage, and but also, of course, the challenges are always there.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about the fact that I mean, I have many friends who are Muslim, practicing Muslims, who are, but who do not cover their hair, who do not
Mm,
wear a hijab,
mm.
um,
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
and I'm sure you do too as well. In addition, and I'm going to be slightly crass in what I'm going to say, you're also extremely light-skinned, as
Mm,
people in South Asia would say, fair and lovely, uh,
yes.
um, and you have a name that's Ramona,
Mm,
which could be
yeah.
from anywhere. It could
Yes.
have been
Yeah.
so easy. Let's rewind a few years and
Blend
make
in
you,
a
I don't know, 15 years old, growing up in Kent. It could have been so
bit.
easy for you to pass off, to pass off as a non-Muslim South Asian, could it not? Or am I really challenging that idea?
Well, actually, I was a bit, for some reason, I was slightly darker when I was younger. And I mean, I don't know whether my skin just stretched over my body or something, but like I became lighter when I was older. So people were always aware of my ethnicity. When I was younger, I did get called the P word, the four-letter P word, quite often. Um, so, or even immigrant or something like that, or refugee. I was also called that. So it was hard to kind of navigate that. So I was navigating my ethnic identity as a young person, and the Muslimness came later as another challenge, especially when I started wearing the hijab, because then I became a visible Muslim, and I started wearing it when I was 18, and
Ah,
that
you
was just
started,
before.
you didn't do it before that.
No, no, I started just the summer before I went to university, just weeks before I went to university. I just decided to do it after a trip to India, in fact, and where my parents are originally from. So I made that conscious decision to be, I suppose, to kind of further myself even more, even though I was trying to draw closer to God through that act. And I just did it out of love for my creator, and that's why I started wearing it. But I was also aware that, you know, people would view me differently, even my own family and my own friends who weren't at that time, it wasn't very common at all to wear a hijab, and I was I was slightly scared about the reactions, even though I was exactly the same person as I was before. Literally, all I did was stick a piece of material on my head, in my view.
Mm.
But people's reactions to me changed. People's relationships to me changed as well. It kind of helped me in a way. The hijab was almost like a filter. It filtered out what people really felt about me or thought about me. It was an eye-opening experience as well.
You must
So
have
I,
learned so much along the way. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but I know you've got
yeah,
other stories, and I may come back to this, Ramona, with your permission. But
oh, yeah.
I want to hear some more stories because I know you've got lots of
Mm,
stories.
yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I think they're all kind of connected as well.
I'm sure, yeah.
With the, I mean, a lot of them are to do with. Unfortunately, I didn't want to go on about hijab, but like one of them, another story is about that again, and
Please
it's
do,
about
yeah. No, I
people's
want all of us,
perspective.
sorry to interrupt, I really want us listeners to understand and appreciate um, just a piece of cloth on somebody's head, as you very, very cleverly put it, because that's really all it is. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember going out, um, I don't remember, maybe a year ago or something, and it was one of those warm days, you didn't have coats and so on, but I happened to have a shawl in my handbag, and it suddenly started raining. So I picked up the shawl and wrapped my head. And then as I continued walking, I thought, huh, what if anybody's looking at me, they're going to assume I'm Muslim. So even when it
Mm,
stopped raining, I continued to walk consciously, deliberately, to see if I feel any different.
mm.
South Asian
And did
woman with her
you?
hair covered. Yeah.
And did
Well,
anyone respond to you differently, or did you feel
I
anyone
didn't
looking at
walk
you
long enough,
differently?
let's put it that way. Maybe I
Yeah.
should try it
Okay.
again. But yeah, to come back to you.
Yes. So another story is when I went to chair an event at a literature festival. This wasn't Bradford, actually. This was another literature festival. It was in a very kind of middle class white area. Wonderful festival, but I stood out like a sore thumb. And it was the height of summer. It was really a beautiful day when I was going to chair this panel discussion on the Bronte sisters. So I studied English literature and classics at university, and I've always been into literature, into the classics, and I was very happy to be asked to chair this session. And I was making my way to the festival venue, and I was walking along this path, and I caught up with a middle-aged couple who were also attending the festival. And I just was friendly to them. I said good morning, and talked about the weather as you do as Brits. And we kind of exchanged a couple of pleasantries just for a couple of seconds, and then the husband said to me, "Oh, so what are you doing here?" And as if like as if I think he thought I'd lost my way to the mosque or something. um, I said, "Well, I'm here to chair an event about the Brontes." And he looked at me perplexed. He said, "Well, oh, right, I don't mean to be rude, but why are they asking you and not me?" And he said, "Not that I know anything about literature, but still." And so I was in shock at the same time as thinking, what a hilarious moment. But I took his full meaning. He was looking at me. I was, an Asian Muslim woman in a hijab, and it just didn't add up for him. Like me talking about Jane Eyre, you know. And he didn't think that perhaps I had the right to. I mean, I'm making assumptions about his judgment, and that he, as an English man, had the right authority. So it's almost like he saw me as I was out of my box completely. Um,
Mm.
but my concern is probably less about his bias against me, but it's more to do with my own feelings of being an imposter. So kind of the bias against myself as a woman. And I've kind of like reflected a lot about how I internalize messaging. We generally can do, like with toxic patriarchy, like we can also be an extension of the system that oppresses us, right? So I have always had an issue with confidence. I've always thought, am I good enough to do this? Am I worthy enough? Am I intelligent enough? So I think when he said that, it kind of touched on that imposter phenomenon, or idea, that you know that women shouldn't really be doing these things because they're not they don't possess the skill set. But also on top of that, of course, it was my color and my faith, that he probably picked up on more than anything else. But I've often thought about the prejudice that I have against myself as a woman, and the barriers that I've built up for myself, where I have stopped myself kind of trying to reach for certain goals, or have enough self-belief in order to carry out certain things. And that's something that I need to work through. um, and I question myself over as well a lot.
So
So
I mean,
yeah.
there are a few things here that you've said from how I'm listening. Of course, we all listen differently, and who knows, what the
Mm,
listeners have taken away from these stories. But I mean, there are a couple of things I want to just flag up for my own sake, and one is that I'd make that too. One, of course, is the idea of what you've just ended with, which is about imposter syndrome, and 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 imposter syndrome, as we know from the research that's done, is amongst lots of people, but predominantly, across both genders or genders, but
mm,
predominantly amongst women.
yes.
And that's because of the fact that the majority world is patriarchal, and how we are brought up is slightly different. We know, for example, there's a glass ceiling in terms of salaries for women and so on. And it's also about being creative. The research that I've read on imposter syndrome is that people in the creative industry, male, female, whatever gender you might be, they are the ones who, looking at creativity, are predominantly those who have imposter syndrome. And you are in the creative industry.
Yeah.
You write, that's what you do for a living. And so start questioning, I read somewhere, I think it might have been Kate Blanchett, who couldn't understand how she could be such a well-known actress. I've forgotten which actress it was, but yeah, stories like that. But but there's another aspect, which you also brought up, which is this idea, and I want to explore that very briefly, if I may, Ramona, which is this idea of, are we allowed to speak about things not to be? Or are we, for example, I remember one of my earlier podcasts that I shared, maybe season one, season two, uh, somebody who was Indian, living in America. He was a Michelin star chef, and he had cooked. He was in his restaurant. He had cooked something, some dish or the other, but it was not Indian food.
Mm,
And the critic questioning how and why an Indian should be cooking anything else other than Indian food. So my question to you is similar. Does that mean that you, because you are South Asian, because you are Muslim, you are only allowed to speak about that?
mm. Yeah, this is the thing with either having a USP or pigeonholing yourself. So
Exactly,
with a
both.
lot of
Yeah.
yeah, so with a lot of the work that I've done, also I've built a career around my faith identity as well. So I have talked a lot about um, being a British Muslim, being a British South Asian Muslim. But, often people will come to you and they might commission you to write about those experiences because I think you don't have anything else to say. So when I was chairing this thing on an aspect of English literature, it's not something that people would normally connect with someone who looks like me. However, it's something that was a passion of mine, and something I studied at school, at university, that I still love. Um, but there seems to be some kind of ownership that is perceived over some of these things, where only people who reflect that genre can speak about them with any authority. So I've had to kind of fight against those presumptions, and also against my internal barriers that have told me you aren't the right person to talk about this. And that's always an ongoing battle. But it also makes me critique myself more, and it makes me work harder as well, in a way, because I famously over prepare for panel discussions or for anything that I do, because I want to be able to prove to myself as well that I can do it, in a way.
And of course, you've also, unlike many other friends that both you and I have, added an extra layer by putting that cloth over your hair.
Yeah.
And you've
Yeah.
chosen to do that. Maybe your family members don't. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was the first one in my family and extended family to wear it.
Yeah.
My mother doesn't wear it. My sister didn't wear it when I started wearing it. She's younger than me, but she did start wearing it when she was at university later on, of her own accord. Um, yes, so it was interesting to kind of be the black sheep within the family.
Yeah. No, because see, we're talking, when we talk about imposter syndrome and self-belief and, in so many ways, what I hear when I hear you, what I feel when I hear you is admiration, because you could so easily make your life easier and not wear a hijab. And you may not be that man, that white English man, as you're walking down towards the tent, may not have said what he did. We don't know. We obviously can't make judgments on his behalf. But so on
Yeah.
one hand, you're saying I have self-doubt. I've got to keep working at it, and I over egg the pudding if I have to because I've got to get it 100% right. How can I be good X, Y, Z? I'm putting words into your mouth. But on the other hand, you're saying, look at me, extremely self-confident. I'm very assertive, and I'm happy to flaunt my religion. So thank you very much, which I find lovely because it's two opposites on one sentence, and how when I'm hearing you.
Yeah. I yeah, I'm just I have always loved my faith and I have wanted to fully embrace who I am. So wearing a headscarf, praying, being Muslim is just a it's literally it's a core part of it is who I am. It's everything that I am. So and I want to be able to write about anything I want to with passion and with authenticity, and with honesty. And I think that as long as I accept who I am, and and I have that for what I believe in, but I also want to be able to communicate with people. I don't want to create a barrier between me and anybody else, even though my physical appearance might create certain barriers, but I work really hard to remove them. I probably work even harder to remove them, to be honest.
Mm.
Since I started wearing a hijab, I think I've done that really. Um, so it's worked to my advantage in a way as well, because these tests and these challenges and these obstacles, they're kind of put in your path for you to. It's a way to test your mettle and to see how you would respond to them. So I've
Mm.
responded in different ways. I'm not saying I've won every obstacle, but the way I have responded to certain challenges in life have really shaped me, my perceptions of myself and of the world around me. And I think that's the wonderful thing about self-development, or just going through life and experiencing life to the full. I just love having these different encounters with people, learning about myself and others, and I just always want to build a bridge of communication, even if there isn't agreement on either side. The communication is so key.
I love that. Thank you for that. I'm not going to comment on that at all. But another story, perhaps, if you have one.
Yes, I do. So, oh, gosh, I mean, I feel I'm bored of talking about hijab myself, but now I don't know why. A lot of the unconscious bias comes into
But it
that.
does, though, doesn't it? It can't
It
be
really
helped.
does.
Yeah.
It does, unfortunately, and it's something that's been really affected my life. So I said earlier, I started wearing hijab when I was 18, just before going to university. Um, and I saw biases that worked against me as well as for me.
Hmm.
When I was at uni, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how are people going to respond to me? Because, it was a really new experience for me, even wearing it. I'd only just started wearing it a few weeks before. So it was a very, very bizarre, surreal, eye-opening experience. Some people saw me as oppressed. One guy even said to me, he questioned some of my views. He just assumed I would have very strict views. Another guy kind of fetishized me a bit. He said, "Oh, I looked exotic." um, so I had a wide array of reactions. I mean, I went to university just before 9/11 happened as well, so that's another thing to kind of bear in mind. But
Oh,
people were still prejudiced. There were still prejudices against Muslims. One guy in a lift, even when I was in university, I got into the lift, and it was quite a small space, and there was a man in there who possibly from, I think he was from Southeast Asia. He tugged at my scarf and he just said, "What is this?" Like in a hostile way, as in, why on earth do you have this on your head? And I just said, I actually felt very intimidated in that space.
I'm sure.
Um, yeah, it wasn't not a nice feeling, and he made me feel like I wasn't in a safe space. And he was a stranger; he had no clue who I was, and yet he thought he had the right to do that. So I kind of I responded whatever way I could, but it's something that I still remember to this day. That feeling that he made me feel in that lift, in that
Also, you were
elevator.
in a closed space and you were trapped after the lift
Yeah,
door open. That's a
yeah,
scary space.
it was not a nice space. So it was really yeah, it was a very strange experience to see how people reacted to me. Some I had a lot more salams than I ever had, because like, people recognize me as Muslim, so people would say salam to me just as they passed by, other Muslims. So that was nice. So that recognition was lovely. But you're constantly aware of how people might perceive you, and actually wearing it might have given me challenges, but also at the same time it did build confidence in different ways, because I had felt completely at ease with myself wearing it. And I was aware of myself, and I wanted to be more expressive and forthcoming to people. So it actually built my confidence up, because I wanted to challenge any notions that they might hold. And this is Muslims as well as non-Muslims, by the way. I
Of
mean,
course, yeah.
there were many, many Muslim female friends who didn't wear hijab, but they always said to me they felt judged by women who wore hijab before, but they never felt that way around me, because I would just be myself around them, and they felt completely comfortable. So it did break down some of their perceptions about other women in hijab. So yeah, I saw it as a tool to kind of break down those misconceptions and to build rapport, and it also meant I had to work harder to work against prejudices that people may have built up from their previous experiences or readings of Muslims and Islam. So yeah, it was interesting.
Well, I mean, interesting is putting it extremely mildly, because certainly, there are Muslims all over the world, and I'm sure there are many people listening in, thinking about their own experiences and what matters to them. And certainly, those of us listeners who are non-Muslims, we may have so many opinions and ideas and prejudices, especially since 9/11 and continuing to the day. And depending on which country we live in or come from, um, we are influenced yet again because of the politics of the country and the influences of what's going on where you live. So there's a lot there, and something as simple as wearing a hijab or not wearing a hijab. And what I loved about what you just said is about the fact that it's about your growth. It's about working harder to share and to be honest and to be open and to be authentic and to just be yourself. Um,
Mm,
that's so good for
absolutely.
us, isn't it, as human beings?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that ongoing process again of self-awareness, building that self-awareness, and building all the other aspects of yourself, like with the confidence, with the breaking through self-doubt, and building those moments, those encounters, building communication, because even if it's not going to be the best experience that you have with another person, it's still an experience, and it's just another perspective that they might have of a person of faith, or of a person who is of South Asian descent. But it's all nuanced, and we just know that we are complex human beings. We're not one way, and I think that's the beauty of being human, isn't it?
Without a shadow of a doubt, exactly. I mean, you said that in the beginning, that we're all nuanced, and that is exactly the beauty of being human. But do you, Ramona, actually, I don't know, do you have any sort of mantra every morning that, this is how you will live your life, live your day on a day-to-day basis. I mean, what do you do? Because challenges come across all the time. I mean, tomorrow you will sit in the tube or you will walk down the road and somebody might shout terrorist at you. That's life.
Yeah.
Is there something that you do to manage your own unconscious biases?
Wow. I generally, sometimes when I'm on the underground or I'm on a train, I just look around me at the people and I just think everyone has their own dreams, their own fears, their own traumas, their own joys. And that really does help me to kind of break down some of my own prejudices that I have with other people. I try my best to understand how other people might function, because I know that I'm unpredictable myself. And I think that, people around you, you can't always make assumptions. Sometimes you might have to for survival instincts, but then once you've made them, then you critique them. Then you think about, why that person might be a certain way. Because I'm forged by everything that's happened in my life, my own beliefs, my cultural values, the values that my family have given to me, my parents, the experiences that they gave me growing up, because I met so many different types of people through them. My parents had friends from all different backgrounds, and I think that really, really helped with my sense of, I don't know, that community is everyone, and that you can just build up such a wonderful kind of perspective on life when you have these different encounters with people, and you do find the commonalities as well as kind of celebrate the differences. So, and that's something that I just kind of carry in my life. I think it's been organic as well as something that is conscious work. So I think I'm really blessed in that way, I suppose, that I've got both. Bit
That's
of both.
just so wonderful. But no, but it is a bit of both. It is about curiosity, and it's about just sitting on that tube, that underground, and just looking at strangers and appreciating that we all come with our own stories. I love that. Oh,
Definitely.
we
Yeah,
could
we're all
talk forever. We really could,
yeah.
Remona, but I think we should pause for the moment. I mean, Remona Aly, I really appreciate your sharing your stories of unconscious bias with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. You've been wonderful.
Thank you for listening to Stories Seldom Told. I am Smitha Tharoor. It is you, the listener, that makes this podcast what it is. If you like this podcast, please do share. If any of you anywhere in the world feel that you have stories to share, please do connect with me on social media at Smitha Tharoor on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or on my company page, Tharoor Associates, on Facebook. We will be back next week.